I will not take her. Torvald's voice rang across the hall of Emberhold, cold as a blade drawn in winter. Look at her. An Omega with no name worth speaking, no rank, no gift. I choose Selene instead. Let the runt find her own corner. I had come to Emberhold as a guest, nothing more, a visiting king watching another pack bind its young. From the high seat I saw the girl he cast aside. She stood alone in the candlelight, her gray gown plain among the silks, and she did not flinch. She did not weep or beg. She lifted her chin, and something in me leaned toward her before I understood why. The hall laughed. Torvald smiled at Selene, who preened at his side, and the laughter spread like a grass fire through the benches. I have ruled long enough to know the sound of a crowd feeding on one small soul. I have hated that sound my whole life, but this time it did more than anger me. This time, when my eyes found the Omega, the world began to narrow to a single point. She turned to leave. That was all. No plea, no tears, she gathered the plain gray of her skirt in one steady hand and walked toward the great doors with her head held as high as any queen's. And with each step she took away from me, the mark on the back of my hand grew warm. I had worn that mark unlit for 40 years. Every king of my line is born with it, the pale silver tracing of a wolf curled beneath the skin, and it sleeps until the fated one draws near. My father's blazed the night he met my mother. Mine had never so much as flickered, not through 100 courtships, not through the long ache of ruling alone. I had made my peace with cold silver. I had told myself some kings are meant to walk without a mate. Then she walked away from me, and the wolf beneath my skin woke and began to burn. The heat climbed my wrist. I looked down and the silver was no longer silver. It ran gold and living, light pouring from the lines of it, bright enough to throw shadows on the table. Around me, nobles gasped and drew back. I heard none of it. Because in that moment the whole roaring hall of Emberhold went quiet in my ears, every voice and every laugh sinking away, until the only sound left in all the world was the quick, frightened beating of her heart. I rose. Chairs scraped. Someone said my name and my title both, as if reminding me who I was. I did not need reminding. I knew exactly who I was. I was the man whose mate was 3 steps from the door, and I would cross a burning hall on my knees before I let those doors close between us. Stop, my voice filled the hall. It was not loud. It did not need to be. She stopped. She turned back, and I saw her face fully for the first time, not the mask of dignity she had worn for the crowd, but the raw thing beneath it, wary and bright and bracing for one more cruelty. She had learned to expect the world to strike. I felt that knowledge settle in my chest like a stone. I stepped down from the high seat. The gold light of the mark spilled across the floor ahead of me, and where it touched, the laughter died. I walked to her through the sudden hush, past Torvald, past the smug and startled faces, and I stopped an arm's length away because I would not close that last distance without her leave. Forgive me, I said, and I lifted my marked hand so the whole hall could see it blaze. I have looked for you my entire life. Her eyes went to the light, then to my face. You are the king of the northern reaches, she said low. You do not know my name. Then give it to me. I held her gaze. And if it is not freely given, I will step back and trouble you no more. You have been claimed against your will once tonight. I will not be the second man to do it. Something moved behind her eyes, surprise, I think, that anyone would offer her a door instead of a cage. The hall held its breath. She looked at the door she had meant to walk through, and then she looked at me, and her hand, the small, steady hand that had gathered her skirt, rose and turned palm up between us. On her wrist, faint as breath on glass, a thread of gold had begun to answer mine. Nea, she said, my name is Nea. Nea, I said it the way one says a word learned in childhood and never forgotten. When my fingers closed over hers, the 2 marks flared together, hers and mine, gold calling to gold, and the light of it filled the hall of Emberhold until no shadow could hide in any corner. I heard the pack draw breath as one. I did not look at them. I looked only at her, and I brought her hand to my lips, and I bowed my head over it, a king, before the whole assembled pack, bowing to the Omega they had thrown away. Before all of Emberhold, I said, loud now, letting it carry to the rafters, I name this woman my fated mate and my chosen Luna. The mark does not lie. It has waited 40 years to find her. Any man who called her worthless tonight called the blood of my house worthless, and I will hear his apology or I will hear nothing from him again. The silence that followed was a different silence than the one that had laughed. I felt her hand steady in mine, no longer bracing for a blow. Torvald found his voice. My lord, I did not know, had I any notion she was. You did not need a notion. I turned to him at last, and I kept my voice even because cruelty is a small man's tool and I would not pick it up in front of her. You needed only to look at her as I looked and see a person where you saw a runt. You will not be punished, Torvald. You have punished yourself. You had the truest heart in this kingdom standing before you in a gray dress and you traded her for silk. You will remember that every morning for the rest of your life. That is enough. That is more than enough. Selene had drawn her hand from his arm. He stood alone now in the center of the floor where he had made his choice, diminished not by my anger but by the plain arithmetic of what he had lost, and I saw the whole hall understand it in the same moment. No one laughed. There is no laughter in watching a man measure the size of his own mistake. I turned back to Nea. The gold had settled to a low, warm glow between our joined hands, no longer a fire but a hearth. You may still refuse me, I told her quietly for her alone. A mark is a promise, not a chain. If you want the door, I will open it myself and see you home with an honor guard and never speak of this again. The choice was taken from you once tonight. I give it back. She looked up at me, and for the first time the wariness in her face gave way. No one, she said, has ever offered me a choice before. Then I will offer you one every day, I said, for as long as you let me stand beside you. Her fingers tightened around mine. That was her answer, and I felt it land in my chest brighter than any mark. I would see the northern reaches, she said. I have heard the winters there are long. They are, I said, but no longer cold. And I felt my own mouth curve, the first true smile I could remember wearing under that high roof. I turned us to face the hall together, her hand in mine, the gold light steady between us. The nobles who had laughed now stood, one by one, and lowered their heads, to her, to their Luna, in the belated courtesy the small always find once the powerful have shown them the way. I watched Nea receive it. She did not gloat. She met each bowed head with the same quiet grace she had worn walking toward the door, and I understood then that her dignity had never been armor. It was simply who she was. The pack had been too busy laughing to see it. We walked the length of Emberhold's hall together, past the long tables, past Selene with her downcast eyes, past the guttering candles and the staring faces, and at the great doors I paused. I had one thing left to do. I sent for Torvald's mother, an old, frightened woman who had raised the boy and taught him, I do not doubt, better than he had lived. I took a ring from my own hand, a small thing of northern silver, and I pressed it into her palm. Your son made an error tonight, I told her gently, but he is young and young men can grow. See that he does, and know that the Lunar of the North holds no grudge against your house. I said it so the hall would hear that grace, not vengeance, had carried the night. Nea's eyes shone at me when I returned to her side, and that was worth more than any crown. Then I opened the doors myself, as I had promised I would, and the cold, clean night of the North lay beyond them, full of stars. My mate stepped through at my side with her head high, as it had always been high, and behind us the hall of Emberhold stood silent and changed, having learned the oldest truth my people know. The mark does not lie. It waits and it waits, and when at last it wakes for the one heart in all the world worth crossing a burning hall to reach. Mine had waited 40 years. Hers had waited her whole life to be seen. And on the road home beneath the long northern sky, I listened to her heartbeat slow and steady beside my own, and I knew I would never again hear anything sweeter.